Hey everyone, welcome to God's Plan Your Part Year 2, where this year we're reading through and studying the entire New Testament one chapter at a time. Thanks again for joining us in discovering God's plan and your part in it.
We are starting off this week in Luke chapter 12 with a conversation about money, specifically how much is enough and how much should you keep for yourself. It actually could be money and possessions. There's quite a few things to learn from Luke chapter 12. I'm excited to jump into all of them, but I think we're going to end up talking quite a bit about money and possessions. So take it away.
I think I would also tag on the idea of comforts, things that we allow ourselves to take comfort in over God's provisions, which is wealth and money.
Yeah.
But I think comforts also goes along with that. So, before we even jump into those specific pieces, there is something to note in verse 5. So there's like a short section where Jesus talks about having no fear, except for one thing, which is the fear of, well, actually, I'll just read the verse. It says, verse 5 says, "But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he is killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him." So what's interesting about this is I always have the idea that it is Satan that they're speaking of, because it's like being damned to eternal hell is not a pleasant thing. However, God is the one that is being spoken of in this verse because he is the one who has the authority to cast someone into final judgment. So it's interesting that he is saying like, hey, in this life, fear the Lord, like fear God, because he is the one who has the authority to cast someone into hell. So I think it's just interesting that it's like you can be worried about all of these other things like money, possessions, the comforts that you have in this world, but there is one thing to fear, and that is like your eternal destination if you're deciding to live a life where you're rejecting God.
It's funny. I feel like recently, I guess, within the last couple of years, every time I hear fear of the Lord mentioned, I can feel myself and I can sense other people rushing to say, no, fear doesn't mean be afraid. It means like be in awe, like have incredible respect. And that is true. And this can be a confusing concept, like, well, why are we supposed to fear God? What's interesting here in this passage, and I think in all the passages where we're taught about the fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom. I think that's in Proverbs 10, I think. Basically, like if you are far from God and you are rebelling against God, you actually should be legitimately actually afraid because you will come under judgment. And if you are far from God and you are intentionally fleeing from God, God's judgment could be severe. And that is what Jesus is talking about. He's saying, like, have your allegiance be to God, serve God, don't fear man. If anything, fear God who will judge you. And if you are far from God, you should be actually legitimately afraid of the judgment that is coming. If you're not far from God and you are seeking to live a life that honors Christ, the fear of the Lord is kind of like this healthy understanding of the power and the authority that God has. It is this awe and reverence that is due to God, and you should be respectful to God and you should be obedient to him because that is the foundation of our faith. And it's the foundation of the wisdom that we will receive from honoring God with our lives.
I think it also has to do, like you were sort of mentioning, has to do with respecting the authority of God too. So like I think of, and I know this example doesn't apply to everyone because everyone's relationships with their actual earthly father may look very different from person to person. However, I know in our family, there's a respect for both of us, mother and father, but our children know there's like a healthy fear of their father in that like they know that he will take care of them, whether it is in, guiding them along, encouraging them, but also like providing consequence when necessary when they know that they've done something wrong. So there is a healthy fear in that, yeah, daddy's definitely going to follow through, but at the same time, I know that he's taking care of me. So I think it's that respecting the authority of who God is and that, yes, ultimately he holds that final judgment consequence for us if we decide to reject who he is.
There has been an effort, I think, to make Jesus feel more accessible, make God feel more accessible. And because of that, I don't think it's like totally wrong. I think people want people to come to faith. And so they're like hesitant and shy about saying like, hey, fear God because judgment will come upon you. But if you think about any time, I mean, off the top of my head, I guess, most times when I can think of somebody thinking that they were in the presence of God or thinking that they were able to like be in front of God, they were afraid. They were actually very legitimately afraid.
Fall on your face.
And they fell on their face. The most recent one I can think of is when Peter realized that Jesus, was the Son of God. He fell on his face and said, "Get away from me. I'm a sinful man." It's because he was actually afraid of being in God's presence as a sinful man. There's Old Testament examples of that where people were legitimately fearful of God. And actually God says to Moses at one point, like, if you see me, you will die. And so that's like the power of the holiness of God. And it is a fearful thing. But when we are serving God, when we're obedient to God, when we are under his will, we have this reverence and this awe.
Yeah, so I think that's setting us up really well of just, again, understanding God's authority, but also understanding his provision for us. Like, he's not just some lofty God that forgets about who we are. So I think that really propels us then into the rest of some of these things that have been sticking out to us. I know you had resonated a lot with the parable of the rich fool.
Yeah. I think a lot of this chapter, I always get happy when I find like threads of themes in chapters. And it does seem like allegiance to God and God alone is kind of the thread of Luke chapter 12, because you have this thing like fear only God, don't be afraid of man. And then you have basically like don't worry about stuff, don't worry about possessions. And so you have this really, I think this story is so interesting. Please read the story for yourself. Get a Bible, open it up, look at Luke chapter 12, start in verse 13. The scene is really interesting. Verse 13 says, someone in the crowd, speaking of Jesus, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And this was common for people to seek famous rabbis and get famous rabbis to like make a judgment
them, yeah.
on like an issue. So he's actually asking for a rabbi to say like, you need to split your inheritance with your brother. Jesus just ignores him, I think. And he tells this story. So it's funny. This guy is expecting Jesus to order a split inheritance. And instead he says in verse 15, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And he tells him this story about a farmer. The story about the farmer is so interesting, and it is very uncomfortable when you start to apply it to your own life. And here's a couple things that I want you to recognize, and please read it for yourself. The farmer already has things stored up. So this is what's interesting. God gives the farmer an abundance. You cannot, in and of yourself, produce abundant crops.
He's already got the bunker filled.
Exactly. God does that for you. But what's interesting is he does not believe that it is filled. And here's what I'm telling you. He says, let's see. The land produced plentifully, and he thought, "What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops." So the first thing he says is, I have nowhere to store my crops. But what's the next thing he does? He tears down all his barns to build bigger ones. Well, what was in the barns he already had? It was crops. So he has things stored up, but in his mind he believes he doesn't have enough. And so he tears down everything he already has, everything that God has already given him, to build bigger barns to house even more profit for himself. And it's God then that's like, hey, you are such a fool. Like, you think you are in charge of your life. You think you are in charge of the length of your life, but I'm demanding your soul this very night. Essentially, like, you are foolish for doing what you have done.
What was that? There was a man, I think it was Rockwell. Was it? You said something about there was a man who was on his deathbed and he had anything and everything he could have. Everyone.
Rockefeller.
Rockefeller.
Yeah,
there
Rockefeller.
It is.
There was a Rockefeller that was asked how much he would need to be at peace, and his answer was a little bit more. And he was basically the richest man in the United States at that time.
Yeah.
And so it is this really unsettling feeling, because many of us, if we're pressed, would probably answer the same way. Like, we might have like a Christian spin we could put on it. We might have a way of explaining it that sets us a little bit more at ease. Probably we would answer it the same way. And I think where this starts to get me really uncomfortable. So there's a fine line here, but I do want us to strive to be obedient to Jesus. The man already has some stuff stored up. So it's not teaching that it's wrong to store things up. Where it becomes wrong is where he decides to hoard even more abundance for himself. And always when I think about this is my own journey with with money and possessions always when I think about this is retirement funds. There is no shortage of retirement advisors out there that like really their purpose is to teach you that you do not have enough and you in fact do need bigger barns. So the balance to strike here is it doesn't seem like what's being taught is that you shouldn't have anything saved. It seems appropriate that you would save enough to care for your family, to care for people around you. But the problem is when you become a hoarder of everything, because ultimately it is God who gives us everything. And when we decide to be hoarders, we're believing something a little bit weird about God.
Mm-hmm. So then the next part of this chapter goes into this whole section about being anxious. And I feel like this word, man, it has been a buzzword for quite some time, probably since 2020,
for sure. Yeah,
at least. But anyway, so this whole thing is talking about how God takes care of things far beyond us. I mean, he takes care of the lilies of the field and they have what they need to grow and they come back year after year. But a verse that really got my attention in this section was verse 33. It says, "Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys." So I think what's interesting about this is it's like, it just seems very open-handed to me. Like money should be this thing or possessions should be this thing where it's like, if someone asks you like, "Hey, can I have XYZ?" It should not be something that you even like think twice about.
Right.
It should just be something that you give willingly. And I'll say, I definitely like come from a family and a background where it's like, I don't know, I'm not sure I'm going to get it back, or I'm not sure I'm going to be thanked or whatever. Just like, that just seems to be more where we resonated. And this whole section just, it reminds me of just being open-handed with things, knowing that, yes, we have to like share with others what we have, because if we need that again, like God will provide what we need when we need it.
I'll tell you one of the craziest ways I've seen this work, and I do believe this is true, that like we are cared for by God. God is our loving Father who enjoys caring for us. That is central to what we believe, and it's central to not being anxious, because when you realize that the God who owns the universe is your Father and will care for you, then you will be less anxious. If you actually believe those things, you will be less worried. You will. But recently, like we went through this job transition. I went through this job transition, and I was the sole earner for our family at the time. And I realized it was definitely time to leave my job. And so I did a very foolish thing. I quit my job without another job lined up. Don't listen to my job advice. There are many people that would tell you that that is a very foolish thing to do. It was a very scary thing to do for us.
Yes, it was.
It was very scary. I think within like my last day of work, I think 3 or 4 days went by and I had a new job secured. And the first couple of months of that job, it was like, man, I don't know about this. Like, I think God provided this, but I don't know what's going on. And I can confidently say now, like, God knows me so well that he provided like a better job environment. Like, it's just better to work there. It's healthier for me to work there. But also, like, what I'm doing is so fulfilling. And the way that God has financially provided for us is incredible. Like, it's better than we ever could have planned out for ourselves. We are not rich people. I promise we're not. But because I chose to trust God, God actually came through in a big way. And I'm not saying that to be like, you should try to be like me. I'm just like, wow, like every time I read this passage now, I think about the way that God has cared for me and cared for my family because we decided to be faithful to him. I will add to that, I actually felt very strongly that God was calling me out of the job that I was in. It was not like, it wasn't just job stuff.
Well, and it was crazy for our family too, not just for Ryan, but also for me, because I had just come out of a place where I felt I should be out of the workforce completely to stay home and take care of our kids. And that was a big decision to make, going from 2 incomes to 1. But it was a sacrifice that was like, I think our family is worth far more than what me being away and making a little bit of money or extra money would be like. So being at home, and we had just had our 4th baby, not even a year old. And it just felt like, holy cow, maybe all those decisions were terrible. Like, does God even know what's happening? And it was probably one of the most rewarding situations, because looking back, we can see, and I think even during that time, we can also say that we saw God's work.
Oh, 100%.
Like throughout the whole process, but it was like, whew, don't be anxious. Don't be anxious.
I don't
God will
want to
provide for us.
I don't want to minimize whatever it is that you guys are going through, the
Yeah,
listeners.
it's
Like, I know that
definitely
your
unique.
story is not our story. Please don't hear us and think like, wow, they're amazing and we should be amazing like them. We're
It's
not like
we
that.
are amazing.
Yeah,
God is
God
amazing.
is very amazing,
That's
and,
what's
and we have
crazy.
seen God provide for us in a big way. And actually, like, we have a detailed budget that we've kept for years, and we are actually in a place right now where we have been provided for more than we ever have previously, and we're like doing everything that the world tells you basically not to. Like, we're living on a single income. I'm pretty fixed on doing like ministry income, lower income jobs. There's many things that we've done that don't line up with conventional wisdom, but I think that God is continuing to provide for us because God is a faithful Father who loves to provide for us, just like He is a faithful Father who will love to provide for you. When you jump off the cliff into trusting God, it is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
It's very scary. But He actually will take care of you. He really, really will.
And I'm sure there will be plenty of other times in our lives where, whether it's a job or finances or, even trusting God in a major like decision for us, whatever that may be, whether it's a home over our heads or food on the table,
Yeah.
like there's probably always going to be situations that we find ourselves in, and that will not be the last. Just like I'm sure there are situations in your lives too, as listeners, where God is going to continue to reveal Himself to you as you trust Him to be your provider.
So we talked at length about that. I'm just going to wrap up quickly. The final pieces of this chapter are basically like, be prepared for Jesus. Be obedient to Him. Do what He says. Be faithful to the mission that He has given you, and wait for Him to return. Jesus is going to return, and He will judge us for what we have been doing when He returns. We'll be rewarded on that. You can take that out of that story. And also, like, if you haven't been following Jesus, you will be judged. So we need to do well to be prepared. And then on top of that, he talks about how He has not necessarily come to bring peace. He actually will cause division, because some people will follow Him and some people will not. Even in your own families, you've probably experienced this, where some of you are following Jesus, some of you are not. It actually brings division, not complete peace.
So just to bring it back really quickly, I would love to hear, or we would love to hear, some of your stories of provision. It's always encouraging to hear other people's stories and how God has impacted their lives and provided for them in ways that they just can't even explain outside of God's grace and mercy to us. So if you would like to share those with us, you can certainly send us an email. We love hearing from you guys. If you follow us on YouTube or wherever else you may find our content, we would love to hear some of those stories from you as well. It's encouraging as a group of believers to share what God has done in our lives. So I would encourage you with that, or just even if you don't feel like sharing it online, share with someone around you, as you can help build the faith of someone else who may be in a similar situation. So thanks for joining us today. We'll be back again tomorrow with Luke chapter 13.
We'll see you then.
Thanks for joining today's episode of God's Plan, Your Part. As always, please consider partnering with us, as we are a listener-supported podcast that we hope to continue to grow with support from listeners just like you.
We've made it super easy to partner with us, and you can support us by following the link in our show notes or our description. You can support us with as little as $3 a month.
Every little bit of this helps so much, and we're so thankful for your support. With that in mind, here's today's reading.
Luke chapter 12. In the meantime, when so many thousands of people had gathered together that they were trampling one another, he began to say to his disciples first, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Nothing is covered up that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in private rooms shall be proclaimed on the housetops. I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who after he has killed has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies, and not one of them is forgotten by God? Why, even the hairs on your head are all numbered. Fear not, you are of more value than many sparrows. And I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God. But the one who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but the one who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. And when they bring you before the synagogue and the rulers and the authorities, do not be anxious about how you should defend yourself or what you should say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say." Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." And he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to the span of his life? If then you are not able to do this small thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning, and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at his table, and he will come and serve them. If he comes in from the second watch or in the third and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. But know this, if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You also must be ready for the Son of Man coming at an hour you do not expect." Peter said, "Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for all?" And the Lord said, "Who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom his master will set over his household, to give them their portion of food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that servant says to himself, 'My master is delayed in coming,' and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, at an hour he does not know, and he will cut him in pieces and put him with the unfaithful. And that servant who knew his master's will, but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know, and did what deserved a beating, will receive a light beating. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much they will demand the more. I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that if it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son and son against father, mother against daughter and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." He also said to the crowds, "When you see a cloud rising in the west, you say at once, 'A shower is coming,' and so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, 'There will be scorching heat,' and it happens. You hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? And why do you judge for yourselves what is right? As you go with the accuser before the magistrate, make an effort to settle with him along the way, lest he drag you to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and the officer put you in prison. I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the very last penny." Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of God's Plan, Your Part. Don't forget, you can find us on just about every social media platform and YouTube. Let us know what you thought of today's episode, and if you have any questions, go ahead and post them there. You can also reach out to us directly at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. As always, if you don't have a Bible, or if you'd like to use the one that we use, reach out to us via email and we'll be happy to send one to you. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you again tomorrow.